Welcome to the NeuroKrish immersion. In this episode, we're going to address entrepreneurship and the leaps of faith that we expect most entrepreneurs will have to take. And some of this I am relying on an article I wrote for the Hindu magazine years ago, 2013 to be precise, which you'll find on the NeuroKrish website. I remember seeing a BBC documentary on BBC Two several years ago. And in this program, a group of diverse young people, ranging from a hobo to a highly successful tech entrepreneur, were posed a series of challenges, their true identities being concealed. The viewer did not know who was who in watching the program. What was very interesting was the differentiation. The entrepreneurs in the group ended up the ones being willing to take calculated risks. And this is what we popularly call the leap of faith. One test in this program stands out in my mind. The participants were asked to aim for and hit a target from a distance of their choice. Needless to say, the greater the distance from which one tried to accomplish the task, the more the rewards, and indeed the risks. Interestingly, it turned out that the entrepreneurs in the group were the ones who chose to try from seemingly impossible distances. This appetite for risk, the willingness to try something which appears to be extremely hard, is well recognized as being a quintessential entrepreneurial quality. So let's ask ourselves then, what are these leaps of faith? In reality, they are everyday phenomena that require us to make decisions with potential for us to both win and lose when we make such a decision. For example, a person may have to choose between taking a pay cut in his current job or going out into the job market to look for the new one. The latter, obviously, is a leap of faith. When you buy or sell a new car or a new house, or indeed you take a range of career decisions, calculated risks and leaps of faith are very much a feature of all our lives. Some of us seem to take these circumstances in our stride. We forge on as if we've done it a million times. Others struggle visibly with such decision making, transforming the to be or not to be, the classic question, Shakespearean question, into a fine art. The human personality in itself may have something to do with our ability to take our leaps of faith. There are five core dimensions of human personality: openness, the willingness to accept uh, information, ideas, is one. Conscientiousness, how conscientious, how duty bound one is. Extraversion, the ability to interact, be vibrant, talk to other people, enjoy other people's company. Agreeableness, the ability to be agreeable with others, to get along with others. And neuroticism, the tendency to worry, are the five core dimensions, and they are called the big five. Now, let's talk about each one of these a little bit more. Extroversion, or what we also call surgency, is a broad dimension which encompasses many traits like being talkative, being energetic, and being assertive. Agreeableness includes traits like being sympathetic, kind, and affectionate. Conscientiousness includes traits like being organized, thorough, and making good plans. Neuroticism, which is sometimes reversed and called emotional stability, includes traits like being tense, like being moody, like being anxious. And openness to experience, sometimes also called intellect openness or imagination, includes traits like having wide interests and being imaginative and insightful. Now, when you consider each one of these and compare it to what we call leap likelihood, how likely is this trait going to help you in taking that leap? Extraversion, so people who are extroverts, and openness, the openness to experience, are the two traits that probably give you the highest likelihood of taking a leap. Agreeableness is probably something that is slightly below these two in terms of your ability to take that leap of faith. Being conscientious can play both ways. On the one hand, it may actually impair your ability to take a leap of faith because you are duty bound, you look at things very carefully, you spend a lot of time analyzing them. But on the other hand, you may actually take a calculated risk and take it well because you are deliberate and careful in the way that you went about it. Probably the worst personality dimension for leap and risk taking and leaps of faith is neuroticism, the tendency to worry, to be anxious, and to be find it hard to make decisions. Now, there are other leap predictors that I've come across in my clinical practice in long exploratory sessions that one tends to have with entrepreneurs. We work with them, of course, to help them transform their lives, and we observe a few common characteristics. Childhood experience is definitely important, and it can make you either more or less likely to take a leap of faith. Education is important. It gives you the necessary analytical skills, but on the other hand, too much of it can become counterproductive because with each succeeding year that you've invested in education and each new qualification that you acquire, what you stand to lose when you change horses midstream in your career becomes much more expensive for you. And therefore, the appetite of risk can potentially reduce the greater the education. Family background can make a difference. You could have grown up in a risk averse environment, and that then makes you less likely to leap. On the other hand, we do meet people who have become so tired of their risk averse family that they are intent to do just that. So it could play both ways. Wealth can make it both easy and difficult to take leaps of faith. On the one hand, for someone endowed with substantial wealth, what they stand to lose due to taking a leap of faith may only represent a fraction, and it may be therefore quite easy to do. But on the other hand, wealth can often take away both the hunger and the motivation to take that leap of faith. And of course, we come across blue blooded people, the Anil Ambanis of this world, the Malias of this world, despite being so well endowed, managed to risk it all. And that is also a very interesting dimension of how people take leaps of faith, and sometimes they are not very careful at all in mitigating risk. Now, what paralyzes one, what causes one to not take a leap of faith is fear of failure. For some, the past experience of failure becomes permanently daunting, and they become paralyzed when it comes to taking risks and making tough decisions. And of course, one does come across people who, after their last failure, sometimes over a decade before, ended up not taking any further leaps of faith at all. And basically, that last failure became the death knell to what could have been a promising career. These individuals drift along, they are seemingly rudderless, they are unwilling to take more risks as they've developed a phobia of failure. And these unhappy individuals must learn once again to take leaps of faith. And that is something that I would request everyone who's addressed failure in the past and then not taken a leap of faith to actually consider. One needs to ask oneself, is education an advantage or a disadvantage when it comes to taking a leap of faith? Many famous entrepreneurs have had very limited formal education, and in many instances, they have dropped out of the educational system only to prosper. There are several examples globally: Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, and in India, our own Dhirubhai Ambani, all synonyms of successful entrepreneurship. And yet, all of them did not really achieve very much when it came to formal education. Ask yourself, therefore, is education at all necessary for entrepreneurial excellence? A linked question is whether an MBA is really good for you. John Warrillow, in an interesting article titled Why an MBA May Not Be Good for You, points out some reasons why an MBA may be bad for entrepreneurship. The first point he makes is causal rather than effectual reasoning, that entrepreneurs use effectual reasoning. They assess what resources they have and they ask themselves what can be created. While conventional CEOs use causal reasoning, they set goals and develop systematic plans to achieve those goals. MBA programs are heavily weighted on teaching you causal rather than effectual reasoning. And therefore, rather than ask, what do I have and what can I do with it, you are focused on what do I need to do and do I have the resources for it. The latter approach obviously is not great when it comes to taking a leap of faith. The second reason he points out is adaptive rather than innovative thinking. Adapters are cautious and pragmatic. They take others' ideas and try to innovate them incrementally. On the other hand, innovators overturn other ideas, challenge conventional concepts, and are into big bang thinking. MBA programs teach adaptive thinking rather than innovation. Innovation is the quintessential entrepreneurial quality. Thus, an MBA could be bad for you in some ways if entrepreneurship is your goal. Also, because Warrillow points out your classmates will not be entrepreneurs and you will waste 40% of your risk free years in a classroom. Food for thought, therefore. There is also one truism. When you get into a particular profession and climb the ladder, the more you grow, obviously, the more the employment opportunities. On the other hand, as we've discussed earlier, the higher you go, the more you stand to lose when you choose to move laterally, when you choose to take a leap of faith, when you choose to go into solo entrepreneurship from a very comfortable corporate hierarchy or a job. And therefore, these risks can become what prevent one from taking that leap of faith. Education could therefore, in a global way, be a disadvantage. Too many years spent in education may be a disincentive for risk and therefore prevent one from engaging in that most important entrepreneurial quality of taking risks or of indeed taking that leap of faith. However, there's one point to be remembered that formal education, especially leading to an MBA, can give you a leg up when it comes to talking to investors, when it comes to making networks that are extremely important in order to make your business grow. So one cannot write off formal education in that way at all. There is, of course, apart from education, a role for experience in developing an entrepreneurial mind. And here, I'd like to allude to the five minds described by Howard Gardner, the famous psychologist from Harvard. He talks about the disciplined mind, the one that you acquire through years spent in scholarship, a craft, or a profession. This, he estimates, takes most of us a decade to master. He then talks about a synthesizing mind as learning to integrate disparate sources of information and identifying the links between them. He then addresses the creating mind, which is more the function of a leader than of the manager. Entrepreneurs have a strong sense of creativity very often, and they have the ability to innovate and think out of the box. Howard Gardner then talks about the respectful mind, the ability to avoid stereotyping, to accept people for who and what they are, to empathize and make common cause with them, and be worthy of their trust. And believe me, each one of these is a very, very important quality of entrepreneurship. He then addresses the ethical mind, one that understands well its role as a worker and as a citizen, one who belongs to a region, nation, and planet, a mind that understands duties and obligation, and is able to perceive its role through the eyes of others. All these five minds, what he calls the five minds of the future, are extremely important for leaders and entrepreneurs. And in one way, if you think about it, it's linear progression. Most of us start through years of education leading to the disciplined mind. Education gives us work opportunities, and early in our work, and the first decade of work, is when we start synthesizing information, putting pieces of information together that we use in order to achieve things. We then need to be able to create, and it's the creative mind that leads to out of the box thinking. It's the creative mind that often leads to that entrepreneurial idea. The entrepreneur has to be respectful, has to make common cause with people, has to get along with them. The entrepreneur has also to be ethical, to have integrity, to understand his or her obligations to society, to community, and to the planet, and to be able to deliver on all those things. Hence, the Gardner progression makes a lot of sense, and something that he says, the goal of education is to help people use their minds better, resonates very, very well with all of us. So, if you're thinking entrepreneurship, go back and think about your big five. Extroversion is, as we said, a good entrepreneurial quality which makes it likely that you'll take that leap of faith. Openness to experience is a good entrepreneurial quality. Again, it makes it likely that you'll take that leap of faith. Agreeableness, that ability to get on with other people, to make common cause with them, is an important quality. It may, to some extent, help you take that leap of faith, but it certainly will help you make strides forward in society, in the community that you live in. Conscientiousness is extremely important when it comes to building an enterprise and in dealing with people. But on the other hand, it does not necessarily contribute to your ability to take a leap of faith. And neuroticism, the tendency to worry, the tendency to be anxious, may not be particularly helpful at all when it comes to taking leaps of faith. When it comes to entrepreneurial ideas, we have to ask ourselves these other questions. What you're thinking about, is it original? Is it something that no one has done before? Or is it incremental? Are you developing on something that other people have done before, and are you just aiming to make it better? Or indeed, you're just making a copy. It's nothing new. You're just replicating the idea. Maybe you'll replicate it better. That is very important to know. This is something that we have to consider with any entrepreneurial idea. Then ask yourself, what is your predilection? Do you engage in causal reasoning or effectual reasoning? Please remember that entrepreneurs engage in looking at, what are the resources I have? What can I do with those resources? They don't wait for the ideal circumstance to develop. Are you engaging in adaptive or innovative thinking? Are you going to just replicate or change something that exists, product or service, or are you going to sail right there into uncharted territory? Big bang. Ask yourself that question. You also need to ask yourself, is the Bacchus in you willing? Steve Jobs said two things which define entrepreneurs. I want to put a ding in the universe, which really meant I want to make a dent, I want to make a mark. He also said, stay hungry, stay foolish. Being hungry for success, being foolish in the ability to take some risks is very, very important for most entrepreneurs. And leaps of faith, therefore, are extremely important. Preparing for the journey also requires being aware of what the journey will entail. The journey, any entrepreneurial journey, requires cash. Money is oxygen for entrepreneurs. And if you're being a good entrepreneur, you will run out of money. When you're concentrating on managing your enterprise well, you will run out of money. So money is important. Humility is extremely important because entrepreneurship forces you to become humble. your fate becomes inexorably linked with that of others around you, the various stakeholders, those who support you materially or otherwise, psychologically, and indeed those who work with you and work for you, and indeed your own customers. Entrepreneurship also demands change. For example, professionals like doctors or lawyers and accountants who go into entrepreneurship go from being revered, being put on a pedestal, to being accountable to investors, lenders, and customers. It's a big change, one that one needs to embrace. Curiously, entrepreneurship requires a certain amount of altruism. Your passion for the cause will mean you will make a zillion sacrifices in order to make your dream a reality. And if you have not prioritized your needs before, be assured that you have no hope in hell here on. Adaptability, your life as an entrepreneur cannot be lived in comfortable silos. You're on a roller coaster now, and you cannot make it stop no matter how much you wish. Indeed, being an entrepreneur means that you've caught the proverbial tiger by the tail. And that indeed is the biggest risk, the biggest leap of faith that you have to take. Because once you caught that tiger by the tail, you can't really afford to let go. Ask yourself whether you are an inherent risk taker. Are you like that person in the BBC documentary who would try to hit the target from as far away as possible in the hope of scoring big, no matter what the outcome? An all or none approach to risk taking. And what is your usual response when the going gets tough? I go back to some of the points that I made in my Godfather Paradox podcast. What differentiates psychopaths and makes them good risk takers? And I'm referring to the book by Kevin Dutton, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, in which he points out that they zero in on weaknesses. Bundy, the serial killer, for example, picked out his victims from the way that they walked. Psychopaths are ice cool under pressure. Multiple experiments show that those with psychopathic traits are not nervous when they are under pressure. They do not feel emotions the way other people do. They balance an aptitude for predatory violence with enhanced empathy, the ability to get under the skin of their victims. Therefore, some of these characteristics are extremely important for the psychopath. When one examines, and please do listen to that earlier podcast on the Godfather Paradox, when one examines psychopaths as to what happens to their brain when they take risks, it's very interesting that when they are presented with a moral dilemma, and the dilemma goes from the impersonal to the personal, the emotional brain in most people lights up. In the psychopath, there is no change at all. There is radio silence. And this is something that has been called Arctic neurology. Neil Armstrong, when he landed on the moon, was reportedly cool as cucumber. He barely broke a sweat. And when the data was reassessed, his heart rate fell rather than rose at the time of landing. Stanley Rachman, whose study in Harvard of bomb disposal operatives, identified those who had been in the profession for over 10 years and divided them into two groups: those who had been decorated in the course of their duties and those who had not been decorated. Both groups, when he examined them, had stable heart rates while working. But in the decorated group, those who had won awards in bomb defusal, their heart rate actually went down. They seemed to assume a cold, meditative focus. Bode and Friston compared business managers, psychiatric patients, and hospitalized criminals in their psychological study. What was common for all three groups was superficial charm, egocentricity, persuasiveness, a lack of empathy, independence, and focus. But the criminals tended to be law breaking, impulsive, and their physical aggression dials were cranked up. In a sense, between the business managers and the criminals, the the main difference was the business managers stayed within the side of the law, something that the criminals found hard to do. But psychologically, the two groups occupied a continuum. And it's therefore very interesting for us to consider that risk taking, taking that leap of faith, may be easiest for the one with a psychopathic mind, but one who is a functional psychopath. The one who is not a functional psychopath, the one who is not a socially empowered psychopath, is the one who ends up being a criminal and very often on the wrong side of the law. Entrepreneurship may require, therefore, within you some Arctic neurology. There is a dark side to entrepreneurship, as a Harvard Business Review article points out. Entrepreneurs tend to be achievement oriented. They like to take responsibility for decisions and they tend to dislike repetitive and routine work. Creative entrepreneurs possess high levels of energy and great degrees of perseverance and imagination, which, combined with willingness to take moderate, calculated risks, enable them to transform what once began as a simple, ill defined idea into something concrete. Entrepreneurs also have that capacity to instill contagious enthusiasm in the organization. They can convey a sense of purpose and, by doing so, convince others that they are where the action is. Whatever it is, seductiveness, gamesmanship, or charisma, entrepreneurs somehow know how to lead an organization and give it momentum. They also point out, on the other hand, along with this mystique, entrepreneurs can have personality quirks that make them hard people to work with. For example, their bias towards action, which makes them act rather thoughtlessly, sometimes can have dire consequences for the organization. And moreover, some entrepreneurs have great difficulty in taking direction from others. So there is definitely a dark side to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial qualities, and not everything about taking a leap of faith is good. So, what are the five foundations then that one may want to think about? I go back to two golden words used by Gorbachev when he was talking about the new Soviet Union all those years ago. One was glasnost, openness of thought and transparency in action. The other was perestroika, restructuring your model in order to make it business friendly. One also needs the quality of leadership, a process of social influence in which a person can enlist the aid and support of others in the accomplishment of a common task. One needs to be able to collaborate, work with other people or organizations towards a common goal. And perhaps most importantly, one needs to be able and willing to innovate as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs, too, need to manage their minds well. So while you consider your leaps of faith, do consider also establishing a daily routine. Focus on what you can focus: diet, exercise, meditation, yoga, knowledge acquisition, all of which can be extremely important, especially in the times that opportunities take a long time to come by and come towards one. Skill development at work, developing process, bringing about technological improvements, being lean and mean, all these are very important aspects of organizational building. Being engaged with one's customers, past, present, and future, being engaged with one's team are also important entrepreneurial qualities. Brand building, the ability to communicate interesting things, is very, very important for entrepreneurs because that's what builds an audience willing to listen. And perhaps very importantly, avoiding negative people and negative conversations is extremely important remaining optimistic that things will get better is important because they always do. As Jobs once said, I'm convinced that about half of what separates successful entrepreneurs from the non successful ones is pure perseverance. Entrepreneurship and leaps of faith, therefore, involve many other aspects: the growth of a mind and the development of the mind, as put out by Howard Gardner, the ability to take calculated risks, and the ability not to overthink, and to persevere and to be able to work very hard. I hope you find this podcast helpful in thinking about the various qualities of entrepreneurship and indeed thinking about how and why people take leaps of faith. And I leave you with Rumi. And you, when will you begin that long journey into yourself?